Yeah, I used to get $3 a call, and I think originally they were getting like 50 cents a call. I think one of the interesting stories in it is one of the retired firemen that's now quite old. In his pension, I believe at the time was $15 a month. And so in his divorce decree with his ex, he says, well, you can have my $15. And from what I understand, every time that she would ever meet him at a grocery store or anywhere, she would pat him on the back and say, thank you very much, I'm now getting $300 a month. Thank you for your pension. So it has changed through the years. They do not do that anymore. They give them performance bonds, and the performance bonds are based on the activity during the year, and that's how it works out. When I joined the department, it was 3, 3, and 3. You had to have a minimum of 36 fire calls for the year. You had to have 36 hours of training, and you had to have 36 hours of work detail. I saw some paperwork the other day of our current fire group there, and they're putting in the average in the hundreds of hours a year, and they're still volunteer. Another weird thing about it is when I was chief, 88, 89, 1990, the budget then was almost the same as the budget today, minus people. What we got for equipment and phone calls and copy machines and all the stuff it takes to run a fire department was about that same then as it is now. The only difference in the budget now is we're about $450,000 higher. There are currently 11 people who work for the fire department, from the mechanic at the bottom up through inspectors, fire marshal, deputy chief, training chief, chief. All the rest has gone to salaries. That's about the biggest thing. For the longest period of time, the department averaged in the 39 to 45 members. Right now, I understand the fire department is nearly 80 members. And a lot of them are not from this community. This community used to be Golden Fire Department. You had to live in Golden. You didn't have to work here, but you had to live in Golden. And at that point, when a fire call came off, you were best to park your car on the street and let them get by you, because they came racing from everywhere. A few of the people here would remember the Long Branch. Young's Bar, which is now Kenrose, used to have a sign up the front that said Long Branch. And on any given Friday or any given afternoon, that was frequented by a lot of firemen. And so if they had a fire call in that 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock range, if the fire alarm went off, it was a miniature stampede from the bar across the street to the station.
John, when you were teaching as a volunteer, what would happen if you were in the middle of a class and an alarm came in? What would you do?
I only went, in the years I taught, to one fire during school time. And it's a coffee shop now up there at about beside the bowling alley. And we heard the fire alarm. I had a plectron, which was a notification device. And it said that it was the Texaco station at that time. And when I stepped outside the door of the high school, I could see propane bottles going through the air like 4th of July rockets. And I went over to it. And then the extremely large North Table Mountain fire I went to once. I had an agreement with the principal that if it was a big fire, I could go to it. It could possibly have been his house. But generally people, Golden was different then. You worked for Coors. You worked for School of Mines. You worked for public service. So a lot of the people worked in the community. There weren't so many drive-ins. So if there was a fire, it was in the best interest to let your people go. I also believe it's a state law that says that an employee cannot be docked or cut if they go to a fire during. So I only went to a couple. It was hard. Fires have changed. If you think about the fires that they originally had in Golden, the fires were based on somebody cooking or somebody's stove that they were heating with. I mean, everything in town was heated with coal or wood. And so those kind of fires were in their cabins, in their barn, in their house, etc. You didn't have the materials you do. Some of the really early fires, they didn't have electricity. So you got to realize that the fires have changed in nature. Then we got the fires. Golden used to allow trash burning behind every house. Well, you'd have weed fires. It was kind of an accepted thing. We got rid of some snakes. And then they banned those fires, and then you went to the next grade fires. You went to the next severity fires. The chemicals that are in a house today, I wouldn't want to go into the building. I mean, you have plastics that are making phosgene gas and chlorine gas and some of the worst stuff that's out there. And so that's why things have become more and more armored. I think when I joined the fire department, I was given a helmet and a canvas jacket. It was a fire jacket, but it was canvas. And it was treated with kind of a paste wax. Well, that's all you got. And you didn't wear them, because macho people don't wear fire gear. Well, then we got to going to where we had to wear those. Then we eventually got pants that went with them. And then we got Nomex. And, we progressed on. Just like everything that has happened probably in most people's lives, there's been a progression. From the early sirens to the first plectrons. The first plectrons we got were in the early 70s. And that's a brand name. It's like saying chocolate. Plectron was a little pocket pager. And what they could do is they would push a button at dispatch, and everybody at home would have this little device, and it would beep, 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 and then there would be a very short message where the fire was, and you went to it. Well, the second generation plectrons divided Golden into two halves, so that the north half didn't have to wake up when the south half did, or the rescue squad didn't wake up when a small group. My God, now everybody carries radios and they talk entirely too much. If they just shut their mouths and work at a fire, they would be much better off. But we have north quadrants and south quadrants and supervisor and safety supervisor and, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. And I think we would be a lot better off in some of that. So again, Chief Bales is the chief. He has been chief since May 23rd, 2001. Before him was Chief Wallace. Chief Wallace was our first paid chief, March 4th, 1995. I think we made a big change then. The last year that I was chief, I put in over 1,000 hours working on fire department business, going to meetings, going to council sessions, study sessions, etc. Following me was Chief Bob Burrell. And Bob Burrell was our last volunteer chief. I hate to be last at anything, at least I wasn't that. But at that time they kind of determined that the job, because of federal regulations, because of the size of the city, because of the scope of everything, was becoming too great, and he became chief. And he was chief for 6 years, and then we went with Mark Wallace. And things are quite a bit different, These books up here, and anybody wants to see them afterwards, are divided into two categories. This one is our earliest fire trucks. And I think what I approach it as is we've gone from horse and buggy, and we never had, that I know of, any horses that were dedicated to the fire business. All of our first fire trucks and fire rigs were pulled by people. And the more people that showed up, the more you could get there. And they had to be some pretty healthy critters. Also bear in mind that if you went anything that way, about Highway 58 was the old schoolhouse. That was about the end of the city going that way. Maybe one or two scattered houses up through there, that was it. If you went that way, you went past by Parfit's house on 19th and Ford, which is now torn down. There weren't houses up there. There was a reformatory, which was way out there. If you went this way, 6th Avenue didn't exist. And so there was one or two houses. There's one house up on 19th there that you still see that old red brick, but that's it. So basically the clay pits this way was houses. So you got to realize Golden was a whole lot smaller. And so they pull it with buggies. Golden's first motorized piece of equipment happened in 1919. And I was looking through, it was a little over $6,000 that the city paid. And the book will tell you all these things about all the nuances of it. But they bought a fire truck, a motorized fire truck, because now, quote, City of Golden was getting too large. $3,635 was the cost. And it was an International, and it didn't have a pump. It just carried hoses, and it had chemical tanks on it. And the pictures I've seen, it was beautiful. It was a dark maroon red, and it had gold leaf lettering and fancy gold all over it. But from talking to some of the old guys that had driven it, it was a handful. If you think about Central Station, it faced 12th Street, and they said that they took 2 men to drive it. When they pulled out of the station, they had one man leaning on the steering wheel with all his weight, and the driver sitting behind the steering wheel, shifting gears and giving it gas. And what they said, they would barely clear the curbing on the far side of the street where the barber shop is, barely clear the curbing in front of the Mercantile, maybe miss the curbing in front of the arch, and they could head up the street. Huge job to run it, but they had really moved up in the world. That's about 1919. And they had it for quite a few years. I've seen articles, approximately 1925, the fire department started complaining that the mules were making it to the fire faster than the fire truck could. It couldn't get there. Now, we had still some of these hose and buggy carts, and we had this one piece of fire truck. So 1927, they convinced the city to modernize this truck. In 1927, it was sent to a company in Denver called Pierce Manufacturing. Pierce made buggies in Denver. And they also made fire equipment. So they took this and they put it on a GMC chassis, which many of us may be familiar with, a Super 6 Buick engine. This was the hottest engine that was being produced, better than anything Henry Ford was doing. And so they took the body off and they put it on and they modernized it. And if you see pictures of the fire trucks, that is the picture that is most recognizable of old equipment. It was the 1927 conversion of this fire truck. I don't know how much time I got. 1930, they bought a Model A. So now they had the Central Station uptown. They had to take the doors and widen them out, because now we weren't pulling out of there with people. We were pulling out of there with trucks. So 1930, they bought a Model A, and it was the first truck that had a pump on it. And that Model A is currently in Morrison. It's in that building down there. They sold it to the city of Morrison in 1947 or thereabouts. And with that $550, they went to what had been called then Craig Frederick Chevrolet. And he sold them a used pickup for $550, which Morrison had given us. It was a direct pass-through. So that was interesting. That was starting to modernize. So now we had the Model A, we had the old truck. Now, of all the trucks that have been in Golden, of all of them, that International is the only one I can't account for. I can tell you everything we've owned and where it went the first time after we got rid of it.